The war between the Xilari Empire and humanity had been long and brutal. For years, the two sides clashed, each determined to come out on top. Human soldiers, tough and relentless, fought for survival. The Xilari, with their advanced technology and alien strength, fought to maintain control over the galaxy. But now, a fragile peace was within reach, and it was time for talks. Captain Daniel Carter was part of the human delegation sent to the Xilari homeworld. He wasn't a diplomat. He was a soldier. But sometimes, war required more than guns and bombs. It needed negotiation, understanding, and the willingness to see the other side as something more than an enemy. His mission was simple: help bring an end to the fighting. The meeting was set in a grand hall, far from the battlefield where he had spent most of his life. The air inside was thick with tension. On one side of the table sat the human representatives, and on the other, the Xilari. The princess of the Xilari Empire, Valeera, sat at the head of the table, her regal presence commanding attention. Tall and proud, she looked every bit the powerful ruler she was destined to become. But there was something different about her, something that Daniel couldn't quite place. Valeera's gaze was sharp as she looked over the human soldiers and diplomats. She had been taught from a young age that humans were unpredictable and dangerous. They lacked the advanced abilities of the Xilari, but they had a stubbornness that made them difficult to defeat. Yet, despite her training, something about this human captain unsettled her. Daniel stood tall, his posture straight and strong, though his uniform was simple. There was no arrogance in his manner, but he carried himself with confidence, something that Valeera found both intriguing and frustrating. She tried not to let her curiosity show. She was a princess. She was here to ensure her people's future, not to get distracted by a human soldier. As the meeting began, the tension was palpable. Each side presented their terms, each offering something in exchange for peace. The humans wanted security, and the Xilari wanted control over their territories. But as the talks continued, Valeera found herself losing focus, her thoughts drifting back to the captain. His calm demeanor was at odds with the intensity of the situation. While everyone else seemed on edge, Daniel remained steady. He listened carefully, his eyes focused, never wavering. His voice was firm but respectful as he spoke, responding with reason, not emotion. He was a soldier, but he was also a diplomat in his own way. Every time he spoke, Valeera's heart beat a little faster. She didn't understand why. It wasn't like her to feel this way. She had been trained to lead with logic and control, not emotions. Yet here she was, unable to stop the strange pull she felt whenever Daniel looked her way. As the meeting broke for a short break, Valeera stepped away from the table, hoping to clear her mind. She needed to focus. The future of her people depended on her decisions, not on distractions. But as she walked away, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Daniel standing there, his expression neutral but his eyes full of curiosity. "Princess Valeera," he said, his voice calm and steady. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Valeera hesitated. In her world, it wasn't typical for a soldier to approach royalty so casually. But there was something about him, something different. She nodded, signaling for him to continue. "I just wanted to say," Daniel began, "I know this peace process is difficult for both sides, but I believe we can find common ground. I'm not here to force anyone's hand, but to help us move forward." Valeera raised an eyebrow. "And you believe humans and Xilari can truly coexist?" she asked, her voice steady, though she couldn't keep the edge of doubt from slipping into her words. Daniel met her gaze without flinching. "I believe we can, yes, but only if we learn to trust each other. And that starts with understanding." The word hung in the air between them. Valeera couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her like that, so openly, without fear or hesitation. It was something she had never expected from a human soldier. For a moment, she felt something stir inside her, but she quickly pushed it away. This was not the time for feelings. This was about peace, about her people's future. She couldn't afford to be distracted by a human soldier, no matter how intriguing he might be. But as Daniel turned to leave, she found herself watching him, wondering about the truth in his words. Could it be that humans and Scifi could find a way to live in peace, or was this just another war tactic? As the day wore on, Valera couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting, this human soldier, would change everything. And she couldn't quite decide whether that thought scared her or made her curious. The peace talks had taken an unexpected turn. Princess Valera, though still skeptical about humans, found herself reluctantly admiring the calm and determination Captain Daniel Carter had shown. There was something different about him, something that made her see humans in a new light. But she was a leader, and leaders couldn't afford to be distracted by feelings. She would not let this human change her focus. The next day, the peace talks continued, but there was an additional challenge. The Scifi Empire had a long tradition. Every new visitor, especially those from other species, had to prove themselves worthy of respect. It wasn't enough to talk of peace. One had to show strength, both physical and mental. This was how Valera's people did things. A series of trials were set up in the Grand Arena, and Captain Carter was invited to participate. The trials were designed to test both mind and body, strength, agility, endurance, and strategy. While some of the delegates looked at the challenge with unease, Daniel stepped forward without hesitation, his face steady and determined. Valera watched from the elevated viewing platform, her thoughts conflicted. The trial was meant to test human strength and endurance, but she had doubts. Could a human really match the Scifi in combat, in skill? The Scifi were stronger, faster, their technology far superior to anything humans had. Yet, as Daniel prepared himself, Valera could see something that made her pause, a quiet confidence that was more than just bravado. The first challenge was a simple test of strength. Daniel was pitted against one of Valera's best soldiers, a towering Scifi warrior known for his incredible power. The crowd murmured as the two stood facing each other. The warrior, Zorath, cracked his knuckles, his eyes filled with the expectation that he would easily overpower the human. But Daniel, without any hesitation, planted his feet firmly on the ground and locked eyes with Zorath. With one swift motion, he pushed forward, using his entire body to apply pressure. Zorath pushed back, but Daniel refused to yield, his grip unshakable. It was a fierce contest, and the crowd watched in stunned silence as the human held his ground. For what seemed like an eternity, neither of them moved an inch. Finally, with a grunt, Zorath stepped back, his breath heavy. Daniel had won. The crowd erupted into applause. Valera stood, her eyes wide in disbelief. She had never seen anything like it. She had expected a human to give up, to be weak against the might of her people. But Daniel, he had held his own. For a moment, she could not deny the admiration growing inside her. But she quickly dismissed the thought. It was just a fluke, surely. Next came the agility trial, where Daniel had to navigate a series of obstacles at high speed. The course was designed to test both speed and coordination, something the Scifi excelled at. Valera expected Daniel to struggle, but once again he proved her wrong. His movements were quick and precise, and though not as fast as Scifi, he navigated the course with surprising ease. Valera's mind raced. This human was no ordinary soldier. He was skilled, determined, and above all, he refused to give up. There was no sign of hesitation or fear in his eyes. Even more surprising was how calm he appeared under pressure. Where many Scifi would have flaunted their strength, Daniel simply performed his tasks with quiet efficiency. After the trials, there was a brief break. Daniel had proven his strength. But now came the most important part, the mental trial. Valera herself would participate in this challenge, and she wasn't sure what to expect. She had been trained in strategy and diplomacy her whole life, but her encounters with humans had shown her just how unpredictable they could be. The mental trial was designed to test one's ability to solve complex problems under pressure. The two participants would be given a series of puzzles, each one harder than the last. The goal was simple: solve them before the time ran out. The room was filled with tense silence as the trial began. Valera worked quickly, her mind sharp and precise, but Daniel surprised her again. His focus never wavered. He didn't just solve the puzzles. He did it in a way that showed creativity and insight. There were moments when Valera found herself staring at him, almost forgetting that this was a competition. He wasn't just solving the puzzles. He was thinking in ways she hadn't considered, approaching the challenges from angles she never would have. As the final puzzle came into view, Valera felt a knot in her stomach. The puzzle was a complex one, designed to test logic and intuition. She could feel the pressure building, but Daniel seemed as calm as ever. The clock ticked down, and Valera found herself second-guessing her every move. She had never felt so unsettled by a human before. In the final seconds, Daniel solved the puzzle with a quick and elegant solution. Valera was left in stunned silence. She had never underestimated a human more than she did in this moment. "Captain Carter," she said, her voice quieter than she had intended. "You have proven yourself worthy. I did not expect this." Daniel looked up at her, his expression calm, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "Respect. Thank you, Princess Valera. But I'm just doing what I was trained for." The words hung in the air between them. It was clear now that this human soldier was more than just a representative of his people. He was a force to be reckoned with, someone who would not easily be forgotten. As the trial came to a close, Valera couldn't help but feel a strange shift in the air. The distance between her and Daniel had closed, even if just a little. He had shown her something she hadn't expected, a glimpse of the strength and resolve that humans were capable of, and for the first time, she wondered if this peace process might actually be possible. The peace talks were entering a crucial stage. The trials had proven more than just the human soldier's physical strength. Captain Daniel Carter had shown intelligence, agility, and endurance that had impressed not only the Exilari, but also their princess, Valera. She could no longer deny it. This human was different. Despite her efforts to remain distant, she found herself studying him more than she ever intended. Daniel, however, remained focused on the task at hand. He wasn't interested in making friends or impressing anyone. His mission was clear: secure peace, protect his people, and end the war. Still, as the days went by, he found himself intrigued by the alien princess. There was something about her, her sharp intellect, her quiet strength, her intense gaze, that he couldn't quite shake off. But this was not the time for distractions. The following evening, the peace talks continued in a more formal setting. The atmosphere was heavier, the stakes higher. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a room filled with diplomats, strategists, and leaders. Valera sat at the head of the table, her posture regal and commanding. Yet, for all her poise, she felt a wave of uncertainty. The humans were relentless, and she had begun to see them not just as enemies, but as equals in this fight for peace. As the discussions progressed, Daniel remained silent for much of the time, listening carefully to the negotiations. His eyes darted between the representatives of both sides, noting every gesture, every word. He had been trained to read people, to know when to push and when to hold back. Valera, too, watched him. She couldn't help but admire his calm. There was something admirable about the way he held himself. Even the most experienced auxiliary diplomats seemed to have a hard time reading him. The talks took a new turn when Valera's father, the Emperor of the Exilari, joined the room. He was a towering figure, more imposing than anyone else in the room. His presence alone commanded respect. Valera stood and greeted him, her voice soft but respectful. "Father," she said, bowing slightly, "the talks are progressing well. Captain Carter has proven himself worthy of our respect." The Emperor's eyes narrowed as he looked at Daniel. "Respect? From a soldier?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "You would give him that?" Valera stood tall, defending her judgment. He has earned it. I did not expect such resolve from a human, but he has shown more strength than I thought possible. Daniel didn't flinch at the Emperor's harsh tone. I'm not here for titles or praise, he said, his voice steady. I'm here to ensure we don't destroy each other. It's the future of our people that matters, not the pride of one side over the other. The Emperor studied him for a long moment. Your words are bold, human, he said slowly. But words are not enough. Do you truly think you can end this war with words? Daniel met his gaze, unwavering. Yes, I do. If both sides are willing to listen. But we can't keep fighting forever. There has to be another way. Valera's father seemed to consider this. He didn't speak immediately, but there was a shift in his expression. He had been ready to dismiss the human as just another soldier, but now there was doubt in his eyes. After a long pause, the Emperor turned to Valera. Let us see if this human can truly bring peace. If he fails, we will have no choice but to continue the war. Valera's heart raced as her father's words hung in the air. It was a challenge, but it was also an opportunity for the humans to prove themselves. If Daniel could secure peace, it would change everything. The tension in the room thickened as the discussion turned to the terms of the peace agreement. The human and Scifi representatives exchanged proposals and counteroffers, each side holding firm to their demands. But through it all, Daniel remained calm. He listened, absorbed the details, and offered suggestions that neither side had expected. As the night wore on, Valera found herself watching Daniel more closely. His mind worked in ways that she hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a strategist, a leader in his own right. She had expected him to stumble, to make mistakes, but so far, he had shown nothing but intelligence and determination. But it wasn't just his mind that she found herself admiring. There was something else, his sincerity. When he spoke, it wasn't out of pride or a desire for power. He spoke because he believed in the possibility of peace, in a future where both Scifi and humans could coexist. Valera had never heard anyone speak with such conviction before. Finally, as the talks came to a close for the evening, Valera found herself alone with Daniel in the hallway. The noise from the chambers faded into the background as they stood facing each other. You've done well today, she said, her voice quieter than usual. I didn't expect you to handle the Emperor's challenge so calmly. Daniel gave a small, respectful nod. I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came to do my job. But thank you, Princess. There was a moment of silence between them. Valera felt the weight of his words, the sincerity behind them. She had spent her life around people who wanted to use power to control others, to win at any cost. But Daniel was different. He had no agenda beyond peace, and that honesty was rare, even among her own people. I didn't expect to respect a human soldier, she said softly, almost to herself. Daniel's gaze softened. Respect doesn't come easy, Princess, but it's a start. We got a long way to go, but I'm willing to try. Valera nodded, her heart heavy with the responsibility of her people. But for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this human soldier was the key to bringing peace. She would have to trust him, and trust wasn't something she gave easily. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her want to believe. The next day, the atmosphere in the negotiation chamber felt different. There was an air of expectancy, as if everyone knew that today could be the turning point in the peace talks. Daniel Carter walked into the room with a sense of calm that belied the pressure he felt. The Scifi had already made it clear they weren't going to give up easily, but Daniel had a feeling that today would bring them closer to a solution. Valera, sitting at the head of the table, noticed how different Daniel seemed now. He was no longer just a soldier following orders. He had become something more, a symbol of hope. Despite their vast differences, she couldn't help but feel that they were starting to understand each other. And for the first time since the beginning of these talks, she allowed herself to wonder if peace was truly possible. As the negotiations began, Daniel noticed that the Scifi were more cautious today. They hadn't expected his proposals to carry weight, but now there was a hint of respect in their eyes. Even the Emperor, who had been doubtful the day before, seemed less certain of his own stance. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady as he addressed the auxiliary representatives. We've been at war for so long that it's easy to forget why we're fighting in the first place. Our people are suffering. We don't have to let this conflict define us. We can find a way forward. The room fell silent, all eyes on Daniel. Even Valera, who had been so guarded just days before, was watching him closely. She could see it now, the unwavering belief in his eyes. He wasn't just talking to win favor or to earn a title. He was speaking because he believed in a future where both sides could live in peace. The auxiliary diplomats exchanged glances. One of them, a seasoned strategist named Sorthan, spoke up. You speak of peace, human, but how do you propose we move beyond the bloodshed? How do you expect us to trust you after everything that has happened? Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. Trust isn't something that happens overnight, but it starts with a conversation, with listening. We can't keep fighting and expect it to solve anything. We need to find common ground. Valera sat back, silently observing. She had heard these words before from both sides. But there was something different about Daniel's approach. His words weren't empty promises. He was offering a chance. Chance for them all to look beyond their differences and start anew. Sorthan has a point, Valera said, her voice cutting through the silence. We have been at war for centuries. Our people have been trained to view humans as nothing more than enemies. How can we simply trust that peace is possible? Daniel turned to her, his gaze softening. I understand. I know it's not easy to forget the past. But what if the next generation doesn't have to carry the weight of all the mistakes we've made? What if we're the ones who can change it for them? Valera's heart fluttered. His words resonated with something deep inside her. As the princess of the auxiliary, she had spent her life preparing for battle, for war. But the idea of a different future, the possibility of peace, was a vision she had never allowed herself to consider fully until now. Could this human truly make it happen? For a moment, she found herself lost in thought. What if they could end the war? What if, for the first time in centuries, the auxiliary and humans could coexist without conflict? It seemed like an impossible dream, but Daniel's conviction made it feel possible. The Emperor broke the silence, his voice low and imposing. Words are not enough. We need actions. If you wish to prove that your people are serious about peace, then you must show us that you can keep your word. Daniel nodded. I agree, but we can't do it alone. Both sides must commit to change. We must dismantle the structures that keep us in conflict. Only then can we rebuild trust. Valera glanced at her father, who was watching Daniel carefully. His expression was unreadable, but she could see the weight of his decision bearing down on him. It was clear that her father was still reluctant to trust the human soldier, but even he couldn't ignore the possibility of a different future. As the discussions continued, Valera couldn't shake the growing sense of admiration she had for Daniel. He wasn't like the other humans she had met. He didn't seek glory or power. He wanted something more. He wanted peace, and for reasons she didn't fully understand, she found herself willing to trust him, even if just a little. After hours of negotiations, the representatives finally agreed to take a short break. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was also a sense of anticipation. Could they truly be on the verge of something significant? As the meeting broke, Valera and Daniel found themselves standing near the door, away from the others. The air between them felt charged, but this time it was different. There was no animosity, no hidden agendas, just two people trying to make a difference. Thank you, Valera said quietly, for believing in this, in us. Daniel looked at her, his expression softening. It's not about me. It's about what we can do together. For a moment, they both stood in silence, each contemplating the future. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles. But for the first time, Valera felt that maybe, just maybe, peace was within reach. The next few days were critical. Both sides continued the tense negotiations, each session growing longer, filled with more debates and counterarguments. The room was constantly filled with whispers of doubt. The Scifi remained cautious, and even Daniel's optimism was starting to show signs of wear. As the talks progressed, Valera found herself thinking more and more about the human soldier who had, against all odds, become the driving force behind these discussions. She had been prepared to dismiss him as just another soldier, someone sent to placate her people and keep the peace. But Daniel was different. His persistence, his passion for peace, had begun to spark something in her. On the fourth day of discussions, tension reached a boiling point. The human delegation had presented a new proposal, one that would force both sides to make sacrifices in exchange for a shared future. But the Scifi leaders were hesitant. Sacrifices were one thing, giving up power was another entirely. Valera sat at the table, watching the reactions of the others. The Emperor's face was grim as he examined the proposal, but she could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Could they really trust the humans? Could they trust Daniel? He had been unwavering in his belief that peace was possible, but would that be enough to convince the Scifi to agree? This proposal is a betrayal of everything our people stand for. Sorthan's voice broke through the silence. He slammed his fist on the table, his eyes burning with anger. We've fought for centuries. We cannot just hand over our power because a human says we should. Daniel stood, his posture steady as he faced Sorthan. No one is asking you to hand over everything. We're asking for a chance to build something better. A future where both of our people can thrive without constant fear of war. The room was silent, the weight of Daniel's words hanging in the air. Valera could see the strain on his face. He wasn't just arguing for the peace talks. He was arguing for a future, for a chance at something his people had been denied for too long. She turned her attention back to her father, whose face remained unreadable. The Emperor had always been a man of principle, and his commitment to his people was unwavering. But was his commitment to war the only thing keeping him from accepting this proposal? Was he ready to move past the hatred and destruction that had defined their lives? Valera didn't know, but she could feel the shift in her own heart. She had spent her life preparing to lead a war, to fight for her people's honor. But now, for the first time, she found herself questioning everything she had been taught. Was it really worth it? Was this endless cycle of violence really the only option? Enough. The Emperor's voice boomed across the room. We will not be intimidated by a human's empty words. Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. I'm not trying to intimidate anyone. I'm trying to show you that it's possible to make a different choice. You've been fighting for so long that you've forgotten what peace looks like. I'm offering you a chance to change that. A chance to build something stronger than fear. The room remained tense. Valera could see the doubt in her father's eyes, the uncertainty that lingered despite his resistance. She wondered if he was starting to see what she had seen in Daniel, the possibility of a future without war. But just as she was about to speak up, a new voice cut through the tension. It was a quiet voice, soft yet commanding. What if he's right? Everyone turned toward Valera. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't intended to speak, but the words had come out before she could stop them. She stood, her hands gripping the edge of the table as she looked at her father. The Emperor's gaze was sharp. What did you say? Valera took a deep breath. What if he's right? What if we've spent so long clinging to our past that we've forgotten how to live without war? What if we've been so blinded by our pride that we can't see a better way forward? The Emperor said nothing at first. His eyes narrowed as he regarded his daughter, weighing her words. Valera's heart raced. She knew this was a test, an important moment that could shape the future of both their people. Sorthan, who had been quiet since the argument began, finally spoke again, his voice tinged with frustration. We cannot let the words of one human sway us. Our people need strength, not compromise. Strength isn't the same as violence, Valera replied, her voice steady. Strength can come from understanding, from choosing a path that benefits all, not just one side. The room fell silent again, but this time there was a shift. The Exilari representatives were whispering among themselves, their voices lower, more thoughtful. Valera could feel the weight of their words, the shift in the air as they began to consider her point of view. The Emperor turned to her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Valera wondered if she had gone too far, if she had overstepped her place. But then he spoke. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time we considered a new approach. But know this, Valera, if we choose this path, there will be no turning back. Valera nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. I understand. She glanced at Daniel, who stood quietly by the table, his expression unreadable. He had no idea the impact his words were having on the Exilari, especially on her. But she knew now that the decision was theirs to make. And maybe, just maybe, they could choose peace. The day after Valera's bold statement, the atmosphere in the negotiation room was different. The once tense silence had turned into something else, a quiet anticipation, as if everyone knew the moment of decision was drawing near. Daniel, though calm, could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had spent years of his life fighting, seen death and destruction in every corner of the galaxy. But here, with the future of two civilizations hanging in the balance, he realized this moment could either save or doom them all. Valera couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of tradition and pride were crumbling around her. Her father had always been the pillar of their empire, a man who could not be swayed by outside influence. Yet now he stood in front of her with his arms crossed, deep in thought. His usual confidence had been replaced by uncertainty, and for the first time in her life, she saw a crack in the mask he had worn for decades. The room was full of leaders, advisors, and military officers, all of them anxiously awaiting the Emperor's decision. But it was Valera's father, the Emperor of the Exilari, who held the power to end the war or plunge them back into chaos. Daniel stood at the far end of the room, his eyes locked on Valera. He had never truly imagined himself as the one who could change things on such a grand scale. But here, in this room, everything was different. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the symbol of a possible new future, a future without endless bloodshed. Do you still believe peace is possible? Valera asked, her voice low as she approached Daniel. He turned to face her, the intensity in his eyes matching her own. I have to believe it is. If we don't, then what are we fighting for? Her heart beat faster. There was something about his words, something about the way he said them, that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, peace could happen. But would her people accept it? Before she could respond, the room fell silent. The Emperor had risen from his seat, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the table. The Exilari leaders watched him expectantly, all eyes on him as he slowly made his way to the center of the room. He did not look at Valera immediately, but his voice rang out, steady and clear. It is time to make a decision, the Emperor declared, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. We have fought for too long, and now the moment has arrived to decide if we will continue down this path of war, or if we will step into the unknown and risk everything for peace. The tension in the room was palpable. Every single individual there understood that the next few moments would change the fate of their people forever. Would they continue to hold on to their anger and pride, or would they risk everything for the hope of a better future? Valera watched her father closely. She had grown up under his rule, learning the importance of strength and honor. But lately, she had come to understand that there was another kind of strength, a strength in choosing to let go of the past, to build something new from the ruins of war. I have heard the humans' arguments, the Emperor continued, his voice still steady but tinged with a hint of doubt. And I have heard the cries of our people. We cannot ignore what they are saying. Zorthan, who had been silent since Valera's earlier outburst, stepped forward. Are you suggesting we give up everything for peace? He asked, his voice incredulous. What of our honor, our legacy? Valera's eyes flashed with determination. What of our future, Sorthan? What are we leaving for the generations to come? More battles, more death. If we do not change, we will be no better than those who came before us. Sorthan sneered, but it was clear his anger was beginning to waver. The truth of Valera's words was hard to ignore. They had all seen the cost of war. Too many lives lost, too many families torn apart. Peace does not come easily, Daniel interjected, his voice calm but firm. But it is the only option if we are to survive as a people. If we continue fighting, we will only destroy ourselves. For a moment, the room was still. It seemed as though no one was willing to speak, as if they were waiting for the Emperor to make the final call. Valera's father finally turned to her, his eyes searching hers. She could see the years of experience, the wisdom, and the weight of responsibility in his gaze. But there was also something else, a glimmer of something new. You are right, he said, his voice low. Perhaps we have spent too long in the shadows of our past. It is time to consider the future. He paused, as if the words were difficult to say. I will take this proposal to the council. But I warn you all, this decision will change everything. Once made, there will be no going back. A murmur swept through the room as the leaders exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of the Emperor's words. Valera felt a rush of hope rise within her. For the first time, she believed there was a chance for peace. There was a chance for a future where the Xilari and humans could coexist, side by side. As the Emperor turned to leave, he gave Valera one last look. I hope you are right, he said, his voice quieter than before. Valera felt a lump in her throat. I believe we all can be. Valera couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of tradition and pride were crumbling around her. Her father had always been the pillar of their empire, a man who could not be swayed by outside influence. Yet now, he stood in front of her with his arms crossed, deep in thought. His usual confidence had been replaced by uncertainty, and for the first time in her life, she saw a crack in the mask he had worn for decades. The room was full of leaders, advisors, and military officers, all of them anxiously awaiting the Emperor's decision. But it was Valera's father, the Emperor of the Xilari, who held the power to end the war or plunge them back into chaos. Daniel stood at the far end of the room, his eyes locked on Valera. He had never truly imagined himself as the one who could change things on such a grand scale. But here, in this room, everything was different. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the symbol of a possible new future, a future without endless bloodshed. Do you still believe peace is possible? Valera asked, her voice low as she approached Daniel. He turned to face her, the intensity in his eyes matching her own. I have to believe it is. If we don't, then what are we fighting for? Her heart beat faster. There was something about his words, something about the way he said them, that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, peace could happen. But would her people accept it? Before she could respond, the room fell silent. The Emperor had risen from his seat, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the table. The Xilari leaders watched him expectantly, all eyes on him as he slowly made his way to the center of the room. He did not look at Valera immediately, but his voice rang out, steady and clear. It is time to make a decision, the Emperor declared, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. We have fought for too long, and now the moment has arrived to decide if we will continue down this path of war, or if we will step into the unknown and risk everything for peace. The tension in the room was palpable. Every single individual there understood that the next few moments would change the fate of their people forever. Would they continue to hold on to their anger and pride, or would they risk everything for the hope of a better future? Valera watched her father closely. She had grown up under his rule, learning the importance of strength and honor. But lately, she had come to understand that there was another kind of strength, a strength in choosing to let go of the past, to build something new from the ruins of war. I have heard the humans' arguments, the Emperor continued, his voice still steady but tinged with a hint of doubt. "And I have heard the cries of our people. We cannot ignore what they are saying." Zorthan, who had been silent since Valera's earlier outburst, stepped forward. "Are you suggesting we give up everything for peace?" he asked, his voice incredulous. "What of our honor? Our legacy?" Valera's eyes flashed with determination. "What of our future, Zorthan? What are we leaving for the generations to come? More battles, more death. If we do not change, we will be no better than those who came before us." Zorthan sneered, but it was clear his anger was beginning to waver. The truth of Valera's words was hard to ignore. They had all seen the cost of war. Too many lives lost, too many families torn apart. "Peace does not come easily," Daniel interjected, his voice calm but firm. "But it is the only option if we are to survive as a people. If we continue fighting, we will only destroy ourselves." For a moment, the room was still. It seemed as though no one was willing to speak, as if they were waiting for the Emperor to make the final call. Valera's father finally turned to her, his eyes searching hers. She could see the years of experience, the wisdom, and the weight of responsibility in his gaze. But there was also something else, a glimmer of something new. "You are right," he said, his voice low. "Perhaps we have spent too long in the shadows of our past. It is time to consider the future." He paused, as if the words were difficult to say. "I will take this proposal to the council. But I warn you all, this decision will change everything. Once made, there will be no going back." A murmur swept through the room as the leaders exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of the Emperor's words. Valera felt a rush of hope rise within her. For the first time, she believed there was a chance for peace. There was a chance for a future where the Xelari and humans could coexist, side by side. As the Emperor turned to leave, he gave Valera one last look. "I hope you are right," he said, his voice quieter than before. Valera felt a lump in her throat. "I believe we all can be." She turned back to Daniel, who was watching her closely. She had spoken up, but the real challenge was yet to come. The Emperor had agreed to present the proposal to the council, but would they accept it? Would the Xelari people trust that peace was possible? For now, all they could do was wait and hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Valera could see a light at the end of the tunnel. The days after the Emperor's decision were filled with uncertainty. Valera's heart raced as she waited for the council to make their final choice. Every moment felt like an eternity. Her belief in the possibility of peace had grown, but the fear of failure lingered in her mind. What if the council rejected the proposal? What if all their efforts, all their sacrifices, were for nothing? Daniel had stayed close by, his presence a steady source of support. Despite the tension, he never once wavered in his belief that peace was the only path forward. He, too, knew the risk of rejection, but he also understood that sometimes hope had to come before action. The news finally arrived on a quiet afternoon. The council had met in secret for hours, deliberating over the future of both civilizations. The air was thick with tension as Valera received a summons to the Imperial Hall. She knew what this meant. This was the moment. She stood up from her desk and turned to Daniel. He smiled at her, though his expression was solemn. "You've done everything you could, Valera. Whatever happens, you've already made a difference." She nodded, grateful for his words. "I won't give up. I can't." Together, they walked through the corridors of the Imperial Palace, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Valera's mind raced as she tried to prepare herself for the council's decision. She had known the risks, understood the potential for failure. But this was bigger than just her. It was about the future of both their worlds. When they reached the Imperial Hall, the massive doors stood open. Inside, the council members were already seated, their faces unreadable. The Emperor sat at the center, his eyes not on the crowd, but on the table in front of him. His expression was stern, but there was a flicker of something else. Hope? Regret? Valera couldn't tell. The room went silent as Valera stepped forward, taking her place beside her father. Daniel stood by her side, his calm presence a silent reassurance. The Emperor cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the room. "We have come to a decision," he said. "The Council has spoken. After much deliberation, we have agreed to proceed with the peace proposal." Valeera's breath caught in her chest. Could it be? Was it really happening? But the Emperor continued, his gaze sweeping over the Council. "This peace will not be easy. There are many who still oppose it. There are those among us who believe that the Xelari should never lower ourselves to make peace with the humans." Valeera's heart sank. She had known there would be opposition, but hearing it voiced so openly was a blow. She turned to Daniel, who looked back at her with a reassuring smile. He understood the weight of what she was feeling. This was not the end. It was just the beginning. "The road ahead will be difficult," the Emperor continued. "But I believe that we, as a people, must evolve. We must rise above our past and seek a future that benefits all." The Council murmured among themselves, and for a moment the room was filled with a sense of unease. But then, one by one, the members began to speak in favor of the peace proposal. The voices of dissent grew quieter, and a sense of unity began to form. Valeera stood tall, feeling a mix of emotions flood over her. She had known this would be a battle, but now, as she watched the council members nodding in agreement, she felt hope like she never had before. As the last voice in favor of peace was heard, the Emperor stood and raised his hand for silence. "Then it is decided," he said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "The Xelari will open negotiations with the humans. We will attempt to find common ground, and we will begin a new chapter in our history." Valeera felt a weight lift from her shoulders, and she turned to Daniel, her eyes shining with tears of relief. "We did it," she whispered. Daniel smiled, his eyes full of pride. "We did. But this is just the start. The real work begins now." Valeera nodded. She knew he was right. The road to peace would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of hope that was both strong and unshakable. Together, the humans and the Xelari could build something better, a future of understanding, cooperation, and growth.